Hello. For math, we finished our addition and subtraction unit, and this week we are starting a new unit, and it is called measurement. So measuring things is when you are comparing different objects, and you can use tools to measure them. And I want to talk a little bit about what measurement means and the things that are important for you to know before we start our actual lessons. This is just an introduction to measurement. So when you measure objects, you're usually comparing two different items, and you can use non-standard and standard tools to measure with. So an example of a standard tool will be something like a tape measure, or a ruler, or a yardstick, or something that you have maybe seen your parents or your teachers measure with at school. A non-standard tool that you could use is something that you just have at your house. So especially now, since we are at home, we may not have rulers and measuring tapes. It's good to have something that you can get to at home. And we also practice this in the classroom. This is not really anything different than what you would be doing if you were in the classroom. You're just doing it at home. So you could use things like pennies. So if you just have a handful of pennies. You can use paper clips. It doesn't matter if they're big paper clips or if they're small paper clips. You can use those things as non-standard. So just let me give you one example to help you understand what I'm talking about. So if I have two objects that I want to measure, so let's say, for example, if some things you might have at home right now, if I have a dry erase marker and I have a glue stick, and I want to measure them, I can look at them and I can see that they're close in size, but I really want to know how long or how tall they are. So I can lay them down, and I can measure them with pennies. I can measure them with paper clips. Now, there are a few things that are very important with measurement. So I'm going to show you something that has some really important things to remember when you're measuring, and then we will practice with the pencil, with the pennies and the paper clips. So measurement. Important things to remember when you are talking about measurement. So think about what attribute you're going to measure. And attributes that you're looking for with measuring are length, height, width, weight, and capacity. So if you remember, we used to talk about attributes when we talked about shapes. We were looking for things like how many corners, how many sides. So when you're looking at attributes for things to measure, you're just looking at the one thing. You would want to compare something by length for both objects. So we're comparing two things at one time. We would want to do height, how tall it is. Width is how wide it is. Weight, how heavy is it? How light is it? And capacity, how much can something hold? So you're going to hear some of these words in the lessons over the next few weeks. So just remember, it's just like the attributes with shapes. We're just going to pick one of those things to measure at one time. The second thing is both objects must have that same attribute before you can compare them. So if you're comparing length of your marker to the length of your glue stick, you're not going to compare one length with one weight. You're going to compare the length of both of them. So that's very important to remember because that will help you with your measurement. The last thing, which is one of the most important things, is lining up the end points for an accurate measurement is very important. So what I mean by end point is the end of the object. So that's something that you're going to have to do that to make sure that you're measuring it accurately. Because if you're just putting your object and you're starting in the middle to measure, it's not going to help you. So starting at the end point is what you need to do. Okay. So if I want to use my pennies, and today we're only going to do the non-standard because going to have a couple lessons coming up, and it's going to be with non-standard tools. So if I have my pennies, and I said I wanted to measure, but I want to make sure end point. So if I'm measuring on my marker, okay, the end point, it doesn't matter if you start at this end or this end, but I am not going to take my penny and start here to measure. You have to start at the end, okay? So I'm going to see how many pennies it's going to take to measure my marker. And so one of my pennies slipped a little bit, so I'm going to slide them down. You want to make sure you keep an object right there at the end. Now, these are 4 pennies that I have so far, and I have not gotten to the other end of my marker. What I'm going to do to help me, since I'm showing you this, I just want to make sure they stay in place. I'm going to tape my pennies to my marker so it's easier for me to show you exactly, so you're not just seeing my fingers. All right. So at the end point, okay, my penny is at the end. It's not going past the end. It's right at the end of my marker. I don't want it hanging off. I want it right there at the end. Okay, so I'm going to put my second penny, and you want them to touch. So the pennies are going to touch side by side so that when you're measuring, you don't want the gaps in there. Okay? And I'm going to keep laying my pennies. Now, when you're doing this, you do not have to tape your pennies or your paper clips. It's just easier for me to show you making a video by taping. So far I showed you 4 pennies, and I did not reach the end of my marker yet. And measuring takes some time. As you can see, it's not something you're going to rush to do because you want to make sure that each of your pennies is touching. So far, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're touching. They're not on top of each other. They are just touching side by side. So in doing this, we're going to hear a lot of words that we've used before with our position words and different things we've done in math. So some of these words are going to be some review words for you. Side by side, but the end point is something a little new. We've talked about corners, we talked about vertices, but we never really talked about an end point. Okay. So you could use pennies, you can use paper clips, you can use just something you have at home where everything is the same size. So you wouldn't want to use peas or beans for this because your peas and beans can come in different sizes. So I have my pennies taped and they're all touching. Let's see how many pennies it took. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, there's a little bit of my marker left, but you notice if I put my penny here, it's going to be over just a little bit. So I can say that it took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 7 pennies for the length of my marker. And that's one thing with non-standard tools, is you are not always going to have an exact number. It's like making a really good guess. Okay, so now I'm going to take my glue stick. Same thing, you want to start on the end. So either, doesn't matter which end, but you start on one end, and you make sure that your penny or your paper clip or whatever it is that you are using your non-standard tool to measure with, you want that penny on the very end. That is important. If it's hanging off, it's not going to be a really good tool for you. So I'm going to take a minute. With measurement, we're going to be doing a lot of fun things. The homework for this week has some things where you don't have to use a tool. The first couple of activities that you're doing, you are just using your family members. You're comparing people in your family. You're also going to be able to use a shoe. So you would use your same shoe to measure. So measuring can be a lot of fun. You don't have to have all of the standard tools when you are measuring, but you want to take your time. So that's why I'm showing you right now. I'm taking my time. It's not a quick thing when you are measuring, because you want to make sure that you are doing it the right way. So far, I have 1, 2, 3. This is just like it was with the marker. And I'm very close to the end. So it's important that the end you start on to measure, that your penny or your paper clip is all the way at the end. When you go to the part where you're going to finish, you can have a little bit of space, just like we did with the marker. It did not quite go all the way, but it's almost. And we can say by measuring with pennies, my Expo marker is 6 pennies long. We could say that my glue stick is 4 pennies long. So some words you would hear for length are longer and shorter. So which one of these objects is longer? If you said the marker, you are correct. Which one of these objects is shorter? Yes, the glue stick is shorter. So when you're talking about length, we're going to use words like longer and shorter. If you're talking about height, we could still use these pennies to measure height, because length is how long something is. Height is how tall something is. So if you're using your pennies, you could say how tall. Now, when you're standing something up, it's a little different. It's easier to see which one is taller. You can see that the glue stick is shorter, and you can see that the marker is taller. So height is how tall or short something is. Length is how long or short something is. When things are longer, they are bigger. When they are shorter, they are smaller. When they are taller, they are bigger, and when they are shorter, they are smaller. When we talk about weight, we're going to make a tool. If you don't have something to weigh something with at home, we're going to make a fun tool next week. But for this week, we're just going to talk about length, and you're going to be able to use things at your house, and we'll have a couple lessons this week to talk about measuring, and if it matters, how you measure. So hopefully this will give you a good idea of measuring and how you can use things in your house that you have that are non-standard tools, as well as standard tools. We'll use those later. So this week, don't worry about the standard tools like the ruler and the tape measure. Just use some items you already have in your house. For one of the lessons this week on your activity sheet, you're using your eyes, you're looking, you're measuring, you're trying to see from the people in your house. You're also going to use your shoe. You're also going to use either your mom or dad's shoe. So hopefully when you see your work for this week, it's something that you will have fun doing, and I look forward to doing the next 2 lessons. Hope you enjoyed this introduction.